Jennifer Sey, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Sounds great. I couldn't wait, I should say, to ask you a whole bunch of questions, not only about XXXY, which of course is, doing great stuff for younger women, I think in particular, with the lessons you're putting out there. But after reading more about you, you have had a wild career from your time in athletics and sports, all the times you represented the country, but other stuff that people probably won't know about, like your career in, is it, I'm trying to remember the full name of Levi Strauss comes to mind.
Yeah.
How did that happen? How did you get from, sports to Levi's? Because, people aren't going to, first of all, I don't think people are going to know that you did that. But can you
Yeah.
give a timeline of that, of how you got to there from your time in sports?
Yeah. I spent my entire childhood and adolescence doing gymnastics. I was an elite gymnast in the 1980s. I was on the national team for, gosh, I think 7-time national team member, traveled all around the world, was the national champion in 1986. Um, Despite my successes, I left the sport pretty damaged, I would say. I think it's no secret at this point that gymnastics is pretty abusive training culture. So I wanted nothing to do with the sport when I left. I went off to college and I didn't want to coach. I didn't want to judge. I didn't want anything to do with the sport. I was just angry and pretty broken physically and emotionally. And so I just went off to have a normal life and career. And I went to Stanford. And after I graduated, I moved to San Francisco and I started working in advertising. I was just a young person trying to get a job, and I was lucky enough to get a job at this really cool ad agency and worked on the Levi's business. I really didn't have any intention of going into fashion, but I was a Levi's wearer since I was a little kid. I loved the brand. And so it was a real honor to work on that account and then ultimately get hired to work there in 1999. And I loved working in fashion. I think and advertising. Like I just think it's really interesting the way that brands can influence culture. And Levi's is certainly a brand that has influenced culture over the years. And that sort of understanding of brands influencing culture is why I wanted to start XXXY Athletics, because I believe that conservatives and the right have sort of ceded, which I don't consider myself, by the way. I'm a longtime lefty and now just sort of politically homeless. But I think anyone but the far left have sort of ceded those tools of culture to, to the far left, and so they're the
Mm-hmm.
ones that own film and music and celebrity. Now we can argue whether or not that has influence anymore after this past election. Every celebrity lined up, and it was not sufficient. But brands like Nike and Levi's and all of these other brands, they put out content and product that influence and inform the culture, and we haven't done that. And so I just thought there was an opportunity to put out a really high quality brand with a really clear message that normalizes standing up for women and girls. But the way the transition was just me growing up and becoming an adult and needing to get a job is the short answer.
Now, when you're thinking of this new brand of yours, what exactly, when you say, okay, I want to create this brand, it should be for women, who want to protect women's sports. What is the next step after that? Do you start thinking about, what girls can I get on board? Who should I reach out to first? Or was it all just done, flying by the seat of your pants? Take me through how you first got into the marketing aspect of the brand,
Yeah,
because we know the ideology behind it, and
yeah.
personally I support it, but what was the next step after you said, okay, I want to start this brand?
These are such interesting questions. I really like your questions. I don't think anyone's asked me these before. I mean, I'll be honest. So I worked at Levi's 23 years, and I rose the ranks from entry level marketing assistant all the way up to brand president. I was there 23 years. In 2020, I was very opposed to COVID lockdowns and school closures in particular. I was very outspoken about that. That became sort of controversial within corporate America, that I was this very high level corporate executive talking about these things. And so I eventually took my leave. And I moved my family from San Francisco to Denver so that my kids could actually go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a little break, and I, at some point, decided I need to go back to work. because I am the breadwinner in my family. And as I started interviewing, I realized that was never going to happen. I was not welcome in corporate America because I had opposed the COVID, craziness. And if you're an executive in corporate America and established companies, you have to read from a script, and I refused to do that. So it was sort of like necessity was the mother of invention. I realized at some point after interviewing and being told I would need to apologize for everything I'd done, meaning opposing lockdowns, that I was going to have to chart my own path. And that's when I decided I would start my own brand. I looked around at all the athletic brands that claim to stand up for women and don't. And I thought there's a real opportunity here. I knew that we had to make amazing product. It couldn't just be a marketing gimmick. So my first concern was, how do we make amazing product? My second concern was, how do we market this brand in a clear and compelling way? And that was everything from the ambassadors and the influencers. We work with people like Riley Gaines, to the actual content we put into the marketplace with ads like our Dear Nike ad, which basically is a challenge to the largest player in sport to stand up for girls and women. That got, I think that ad with no paid media behind it got over 13 million views.
Now, when you're doing these interviews that you mentioned, or you're looking for another job in the traditional industry, we'll call it,
Yeah.
is it people that are doing the hiring that are telling you you're going to need to apologize? Is that just, something you figured out on your own, or somebody from the outside told you? Or were these people directly saying, if we're going to hire you, you're going to need to put out the cookie cutter apology?
There were two examples. So one was, I was interviewing for a CEO job at a very large brand and retailer, over $8 billion. It was a company where the CEO was being ousted. So I was interviewing with the board. It was not a traditional process. And I had gone through 8 or 10 interviews. And the last one was with the HR representative on the board. Each person on the board sort of represents a different function. And everybody else had just asked me about my capability, my achievements, my qualifications, my leadership style. She started the interview with, are you willing to apologize for what you've done? So that was a tell. I sort of figured out right then. And I said, what do you mean? Like, what did I do? Because this is late 2023. So like at this point, almost everybody knows school closures were bad, right? I thought everybody knew. And she said, the things you did and said during COVID. And I said, why would I apologize? I was right about everything. So that was the end of that. And then the other instance was a recruiter that I had known for a very long time called me and wanted to put me forward for a big job, a CEO job at a San Francisco company. And it was after this thing that had just happened that I told you about. And I said, they're not going to want to talk to me. And she was like, why? You're so great and you're really qualified, and I think they're going to want to. I said, I'm telling you right now, they're not going to want to talk to me. I am toxic. She said, well, I'm going to try. And she called me back the next day and she said, yeah, they don't want to talk to you. So she said, you're going to have to go to a private company. A public company won't take you.
Yeah, and when I read that stuff that you had said about the lockdowns and COVID and school closures, I don't think a lot of people are mentioning that when they talk about you. So I was happy to hear, obviously, that you, like, maybe not happy to hear. Obviously, it does make me happy because I agree with it. But I'm just saying it's interesting that she has been willing to stand up multiple times now, because I think we are at a point now, almost 2025, I look at the clock, where it's becoming more okay to say these things, especially with men and women's sports. I look at the congressional or the Senate hearing yesterday that happened to date this interview, that they're all being like, why haven't you made your own rules? And everybody's happy to say these things. Why aren't you making your own rules, NCAA, about not having men and women's sports? Whereas even like a year ago, and I say this a lot, a year ago, 2 years ago, the things that you weren't still not allowed to say in traditional media is much further than what we were a couple of years ago.
No, I think you're right. I think that's true. I think the culture's changing a bit. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. So what do you think was the start of that? Like, when did you start to think, okay, now this is something that I can push forward on? Or did that even come across your mind?
That did not enter my mind. So one thing that I didn't mention earlier is, having left gymnastics sort of beaten down and broken, my first time speaking out on something that was controversial, this will make people laugh that this was ever controversial at this point, but it was 2008. I published my first book called Chalked Up, and it was really the first person account of abuse in the sport. And I wrote about very high profile coaches, like the Olympic coach from 1984 Olympics, who was a rapist, basically. And this is before the Larry Nassar story broke. It was before Me Too. So it wasn't okay to say these things. I mean, now we go, well, yeah, women can speak out about abuse, but you couldn't in 2008. And I'm going to tie this to the Charlie Baker thing yesterday. So when I wrote this book, I didn't think about the backlash. I just sat down and wrote what I knew to be true. And I was trying to kind of sort it for myself. And I will tell you, I faced a 10-year campaign of attacks from the entire gymnastics community. My USA teammates, my private club teammates from USA Gymnastics, they would call me and leave sort of threatening messages for me. My name was dragged through the mud. I mean, some of these people have since been arrested for, destroying evidence that Larry Nassar was sexually assaulting hundreds of athletes. These were not good people. But I kind of start saying things before I think about what the backlash could be. I'm like, well, it's true, so I should say it. And that was kind of what happened during COVID as well. I thought, well, this is really bad. It's bad to close schools. And the most vulnerable, poorest children are going to be the ones that are harmed the most. And I just started to say it. And then, I find myself in hot water. And and then people start telling you can't say that. And then I'm like, well, yeah, I can. Like, you can't tell me what I cannot say. So I sort of start down this path a little bit naively. But, I do think there's more openness on these issues, but look how long it's taken. I mean, it's only just now you can kind of say lockdowns were bad and not have people come for your job. I mean, because people came for my job. Like, there were petitions to have me fired. My address was posted online. Pictures of my house were posted online so people could find me because I was saying that school closures and lockdowns are bad. So it takes time, but I do think truth usually outs in the end. And I guess my hope, as I was speaking out about COVID, I was keeping in mind, I had spoken out about gymnastics, and eventually I was redeemed there. So I kept thinking it will happen. It didn't happen really in time for me. But here's the other thing I will say. For those of us who were canceled during COVID, and I use that phrase, I mean it. Like, I don't have a single friend that I had before COVID anymore. They still don't talk to me. I don't live in the city that I loved. There are members of my family that don't speak to me. I don't have the job that I loved. Like, that's a full-on cancellation. I cannot get back into corporate America. So it doesn't matter that I was right. There is no forgiveness for us. Like, I can talk about these things now, but I've also arranged my life in a way. I can't get fired. I'm my boss. So who's going to fire me? But do you see what I mean? Like, people ask if I feel vindicated. Not really. Like, where's my pardon? There's no and not to mention all the children that people like me, moms like me, were fighting for are still harmed. There's still many grade levels behind. We still have not had a reckoning to say that was really bad and it can never happen again. So it is more okay to talk about, but I feel like we're not all the way there yet, if you see what I mean. But the issue of women in sports, I do think more people are talking about it. I mean, obviously, many people think that the election to some extent was decided upon this because everybody knows it's ridiculous. Everybody knows that men and women are different. Everybody knows men are stronger than women. And somehow they were brainwashed for the last 5 or 10 years that they couldn't say it, but they're coming out of that fog, I think.
Yeah, you definitely can't say that. Should be illegal to say that.
Men are strong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It should be illegal. I can definitely relate to the saying things that I think are true before I think about the consequences of that. That's been my entire life. And I can definitely relate to the feeling of wanting to, I think you said, insulate your world so you can't be canceled. That's something I've definitely thought about, and I've encouraged others to do as well. Because once you put yourself in a position where you can't, or for the most, I mean, I could go on some sort of rampage where I could get myself fired or something. Oh my God, the moon isn't real. That's a good one though, the moon not being real. Look into that one, folks. But
or would anyone care if you said that, really?
No, I don't think so. There's not enough people that would care. But I was thinking while you're talking about, people calling for you to be fired from Levi's for what you're saying, but what's the angle there? Her views affect the comfort of my jeans or something, or I don't get what the reasoning would be behind that.
If
We can't trust her to
you have
market
to
jeans.
go back in time. First of all, I lived in San Francisco, so that's that. But if it's hard to remember now. It's getting fuzzy. We're almost at the 5-year mark for lockdowns. But at the time, if you were opposed to lockdowns or school closures or any of it or masks, you were a white supremacist. You were a racist. You didn't care if Black people died. You didn't care if old people died. You didn't care if disabled people died. You were a eugenicist. You were, but mostly a racist. Because remember that right after lockdowns, few months later was the summer of 2020 and the BLM rallies, when race and race consciousness was kind of at the forefront of everyone's mind. I mean, in one way or another, that discussion kind of was thrust into the cultural conversation and the spotlight. And so I was just basically an irredeemable racist. That was the line. And who wants a racist to have a job? Basically is the reasoning. I mean, I am definitely not alone. There were a lot of people who let me transition. Sorry. So I'm making this movie right now called Generation COVID. It's a documentary film about the harms to children from the long-term school closures. We feature a lot of kids and families and parents. In many of instances of the families featured, the parents push back on school closures in their community because they saw the harms to their own child and their child's classmates. In every single instance, the parents in those communities that fought back, that spoke at school board meetings, people came for their jobs. They called them racist, white supremacists. They called their workplaces. And they said, do you really want a person working in your company? Are these values that you support that is an open racist? That's 2020. If you remember, that was 2020.
Yeah, the connection between
it's specious
reading statistics. Because I was one of these people who, right away I was like, okay, how many people are dying and what's the chance you're dying? And then immediately you're just like, well, okay, this is not threaten people who are younger, aren't morbidly obese, and all these other things. And I'm like, well, the statistics were there pretty fast for me to just be like, okay, I don't care about this. I'm just going to say what I think is obvious. And then fast forward to me standing in a grocery store being like, what are we doing? And then this manager at the grocery store is like, we're in a pandemic. Please, sir, stop this. Stop what you're doing. Stop complaining about the lines. And I was like, you're a grocery store manager, and there's nothing against grocery store managers, but you're actually not like the defender of the free world that you're acting like right now. So what I should have done is turn my bag upside down and spilt it everywhere and
I thought you were going to say something about the arrows in the grocery store.
That's what I was complaining about.
Oh, you were? Okay.
At the time. And then this woman's like acting like she's protecting everyone. And then there's another time where there's this 17-year-old in Walmart telling me that I can't drink a coffee because my mask isn't there. And I refuse to wear masks. We ended up getting fake ones. My girlfriend and I, ones where you can just,
ones with holes
you can just completely breathe through, and nobody had a problem with that for some reason, even though they obviously you could breathe through them. But just all this stuff, and it was like immediately it was pretty easy to tell, I thought, and then without pulling you into anything else, Ukraine I thought was easy to tell. That's my own opinion on that, but I'm glad to see, it's always good to talk to somebody who's just like, yeah, I think it was pretty obvious what was happening there.
It was obvious from the first day, if you paid any attention, which most people don't, because they just were reading like the CNN, Chiron, which was a death ticker about how many cases and how many deaths. But even like the first day of, I can't remember, San Francisco was one of the first cities to close schools in lockdown, March 13th, 2020. At that point, like my husband and I were opposed from day one. We already knew at that point. We already knew like the whole thing in Italy, remember that, with all the people dying and the coffins in the street, which was not true. But the average age of death there was like 82.
Mm-hmm.
So just from that, you knew. Now, I don't care if the average age of death was 40. I still think lockdowns are wrong. I don't, because what if you concede the point that there is a danger that warrants lockdowns and censorship, then that point will be manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it really is dangerous enough, we would have stayed home. Like, right? Like if it was like, holy shit, 50% of people who get this of any age will die, like you're darn right, I probably would have stayed home. But it was a completely manufactured panic. And so I think based on the facts, we knew from the beginning, the people, that you indicated were never at risk. Certainly children were not at any risk at all, ever. And then beyond that, I think it's such a egregious violation of our civil liberties that we can never tolerate lockdowns or censorship.
I remember up here there being a Ryan Reynolds radio commercial that was saying young people are dying, get vaccinated, and I was like, geez, they're really going for it here with this claim. Like, I would think that he'd be smart enough to write about it. Shout out Ryan Reynolds. But I guess not, or to read about it. I think I said right. Let's fast forward to,
okay.
It says March 2024 when you started.
Yeah.
The company, is that accurate? What was your first feeling? See, I don't know if this happened before or after. I think it was after. But when, there's volleyball players, on girls teams, there's the famous story of the girl getting the volleyball spike in the face.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of it. What other sports? The Women's World Cup had 3 men playing in it. We've got the Olympics.
Boxing.
What was your initial feeling when seeing this stuff?
That we need this brand. One, I'm very grateful for the women in the Mountain West Conference who boycotted, and refused to play against San Jose State University, because I personally believe this ends when the athletes themselves speak up. An issue that I care about and fought against for a very long time is abuse in sport and abuse in gymnastics. And it didn't really change. And I don't think it's totally changed yet, but it's starting to. It didn't really change with retired ex-gymnasts like myself speaking up, but when the actual athletes competing right now demanded a safer coaching environment. So I think this ends when enough athletes stand up and push back and say, we refuse to compete against a male. It's not safe or fair. So I'm really proud of the women of the Mountain West Conference. And in some cases, those women have just been welcomed onto our team as ambassadors and part of our inaugural NIL program. But I think I would just say this. I think a lot of people are feeling heartened and encouraged. Trump said on the campaign trail that he would end all of this. I think he will reinstitute Title IX with its original intention, and he can do that. There's a lot of areas that he can't necessarily change the rules. Charlie Baker, who's the head of the NCAA, who was grilled yesterday by Senator John Kennedy, and he's a total coward, Charlie Baker. I'll just say that, because he's saying, well, there's these rules and I can't change them. It's like, you're the CEO, you're the leader, you get to make the rules. And if you don't have the spine or the backbone to protect the athletes that make the NCAA what it is, then you should not get to have your job. But he doesn't have the spine or the backbone. And my experience with governing bodies, sports leaders, is that they do not. And so it all will come down to the athlete. So I'm really encouraged. But here's what I'll say. It's an uphill battle. Look what we're facing with the NCAA. Look what we would be facing with U.S. Olympic Committee, which, by the way, is funded by private companies. The president cannot change the rules of the USOPC. The International Olympic Committee, which allowed 2 males this summer to beat women up in the boxing ring and take their gold medals, they are also funded largely by private companies. So my point is, we have to influence the culture. And I think my brand can be part of that. Obviously, strong voices like Riley Gaines are part of that. And I think these young athletes who are still competing are a really important part of that.
I think in the NCAA president's case, where he's saying, first of all, I don't think he ever thought he'd have to face anything of this magnitude. He probably thought NIL is here. This is the worst it's ever going to get for me, having to deal with this. And then all of a sudden people start complaining about their terrible rules. He was saying that it's not his fault.
I know.
It's federal guidance. And then Senator Kennedy and Hawley and Marshall Blackburn were all like, well, you could make a rule that goes against this. And he's like, yeah, but we just go with whatever the federal law is, which is a very weak way of saying I'm going to just side with whomever is in power at the time.
It's deferring any responsibility. It's just like what we saw during COVID, because you had now you have Fauci saying, well, I didn't set the rules. I didn't close the schools. No, but you fear-mongered about children. You set guidelines for local public health leaders who followed every word you said. Local public health leaders said, I don't close the schools. I just establish the guidelines. The school boards say, well, we just followed the guidelines. The governor says, well, I just followed the guidelines. Like, it's no one's fault. It's like this. It's like, who's going to have the spine to stand up and do the right thing and protect children and protect women? No one. They're all going like this because they're all a bunch of weak-kneed cowards.
I think the technical term is being greasy. And when you have to, when you're being greasy,
I was gonna use a different term, but I won't say it here.
Say whatever you want.
But I mean, I think, you know, it's interesting. I think a lot of leaders, corporate leaders, and I'll just say the NCAA is, you know, it's basically being a corporate leader. They succeed because they just sort of are invisible, and they don't succeed because they do the right thing or they're courageous in any way or they make decisions. They like follow the will of like whoever, and they want to avoid making a really bad decision, but they don't actually lean into making really good, brave, courageous decisions. He said in that testimony that he knew men were stronger and faster. Okay, if you knew that, if you know that, which any moron knows, then stand up and do the right thing. But he won't, because he basically was admitting, like, people won't like me and there'll be activists outside my door. I mean, that's basically the subtext of what he was saying. But we let activists rather than evidence rule the day on this, and it's ridiculous. We should not be afraid of these activists. They're not making any sense. They're not evidence-based. I don't need any data or evidence to tell me that men and women are different, and that men are stronger than women, and that we shouldn't sterilize young, confused children. Like, I actually don't need a study. I just know that to be true because I'm moral. I think
the kids would call that him being a bitch, but
or a pussy.
Yes. Okay. We're willing to break that ground. Yes, I will say with
okay.
He's being
that
a big
was my
pussy.
word. It's being a big puss.
Yeah. So when it comes to Braden Blair Fleming, who I've written all too I know far too much about.
Is that the name? I didn't even know the real name.
His alleged birth name is Braden. Gotta say alleged because I don't have his birth certificate handy at the moment. Yeah. Do you have any insight or any knowledge, or you can speculate if you want, not admissible in court, Your Honor, where this is just hearsay, which we always have to say, as to why the teammates on there didn't just say, we're not going to play anymore, so there is no team. I've thought about this because I wonder if it's because, you know, you're not going to stop me from playing just because you suck, or is it because of a lawsuit, or is it because, you know, to keep things going? I don't know. I've speculated. Do you have any firsthand knowledge on that, or do you just?
I don't have firsthand. Well? I'm going to speculate. So this is my opinion. I'm stating that clearly for the record.
Exactly,
this is my opinion.
For the courts.
First of all, this is the Bay Area. Just keep that in mind. What do you think? Like 99% of people in the Bay Area think and say, trans women are women. That's what they think and say, and that anyone who disagrees with that is a bigot. So the pressure they're facing is intense to kind of go along with the vibes in that particular, you know, locale of the country. They are made to feel, even if they're like, well, it doesn't make sense. I mean, this isn't really fair. They're made and probably told, implied or directly by members of the athletic department, if you say anything, you will present yourself as a bigot. You will lose your scholarship. You will never get a job. Everyone will hate you. I'm paraphrasing. I just think, and even if that's not said directly, it's coming at them from everywhere in the universe. And, you know, when you're in the Bay Area or a place like that, it's hard to remember that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily think this. You know, you get stuck in this world and everyone in your world is conveying to you one worldview, and you think that is the worldview. And so you might even question your own view. Like, am I a bigot if I think this? And so I think they're just scared into silence. Nobody wants to be called the terrible names. Certainly no one wants to lose their scholarship. No one wants, imagine how hard it is. They have to play on a team with this person. And everyone's ire is really directed, or at least mine is, at the NCAA, at San Jose State University, at the Mountain West Conference, at the cowardly adult leaders of these organizations. I'm sure they're told that if they go against this person, they're mean, horrible people. No 21-year-old girl wants to feel that way. So they weaponize our empathy as women and females and girls is weaponized against us. We all want to be kind and inclusive. And, they're told that if you refuse to play on this team, you're a bigoted, horrible, mean person. And no young woman wants to feel that way.
It is wild, and I say this often, how much of our societies become governed by not wanting to appear mean. But I will
Yeah.
also,
But they're so mean. The people that do that are mean.
yeah, I also blame the guy himself, the Fleming individual. He knows what he's doing. He's, I can just picture him just be like, I'm going to get those bitches. I'm going to play way better than them. And then they're all going to see. That's where I think every man deep down, aside from, a person who might be going through this issue, where they're confused and whatnot, whatever you want to call it, gender dysphoria and all this stuff, every other man knows deep down why a man would do something like this. They're upset with how they've been treated. They don't like the way women have been treated, or maybe they don't get along with women and because they're not attracted to women. All these sorts of factors will come into play when a man is put into this, when a man puts himself into this situation. He could have just said, you know what? I'm clearly more athletic and more powerful than these women. I'm going to step away. I'll go play somewhere else, where I'm not taking away scholarships from young women, but he's doing that anyway. And for that, I can't just say, oh, poor him.
I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. Like, you're male and you're willing to, and there are stories, you've probably written about it, of, him sort of collaborating with a member of another team to spike the ball in Brooks Lesser's face, who's his teammate, who is part of the lawsuit against Mountain West Conference. He knows he's male, and yet he's willing to take a spot from a female. Like, I sort of feel like if you want to present this way and you want to dress this way, like, just, you can do what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make me do anything. Don't make me call you a woman. Don't make me let you into my space. Don't make me let you on my team. There were people doing that years ago and no one cared, right? It's when you start insisting that you get to have, my sex-based rights that I have a problem. I guess my brain is, I'm of two minds on this. I assume Blair is young, 21, 20.
I think he was a senior, so probably 21 or 22.
Yeah, and I think my understanding is Blair, quote unquote, transitioned. I say quotes because you can't transition, you can't become the other sex, but early teen. So I also have some degree of empathy because I feel like this person is a victim of this ideology also. And so I can't help but feel a little bit of empathy there. Like, this is a person who was probably confused as a young person and was given very bad medical advice, is possibly a gay man, which you kind of indicated earlier. And I guess at a certain point, yes, I'm mad because you're taking a spot from a woman, but I also feel like this young person is potentially a victim of this movement.
No, that's fair, and you're much nicer than me for doing that. Let's move on to this new happy thoughts, the new NIL stuff you've created here. I've written a good amount of literature, not really, but about NIL. A lot of articles is the reality about it, about NIL. And I want to ask you, what kinds of hoops do you have to jump through to do something like this? Because I'm sure there's tons of rules around it. What do you sort of have to set up to make sure is in place when you start saying, hey, we want to sponsor, if you can call it a sponsorship, I don't know, or just an endorsement or an NIL deal, whatever the fine print says. What sort of things do you have to set up to make sure this goes according to plan when you say, hey, we want to, I don't want to say reward, or we want to sponsor these girls. What's the nitty gritty?
With partner platform. I mean, it's a long and complicated thing, and we worked with lawyers to do it, so I won't go into all the details. But there's a whole list of things you need to do to make sure that you are NIL compliant broadly, and then the athlete has to also ensure that they are NIL compliant with their university. There are NIL officers at the universities. It isn't terribly complicated, but you have to cross your T's and dot your I's, because otherwise the student could risk losing their scholarship, which we do not want any student to risk that. They worked long and hard for it. So we just work together to ensure that as a brand that is bringing on these young women as ambassadors and endorsers for our brand, that we are complying with all of those name, image, and likeness legal rules and regulations, and that the athlete is as well. So we want to make sure and help them make sure that they're being compliant with NIL broadly and with their schools' rules and regulations.
What was it like when you met with some of these girls? I hadn't heard of Sarah Casebold is one, Ainsley Erzin is another. They're track athletes, I believe. What was it like when you met like these girls? Were they obviously they were super grateful because and I know they must believe in this cause, but were there things that they said to you that you hadn't heard before or that they'd experienced themselves? Not maybe not these two in particular, but did you
Yeah.
get to hear more stories that you weren't aware of when you talked to these girls for the first time?
Well, some of them are new to the space and haven't sort of really taken a strong public stand until now, until
Mm-hmm.
joining us. But one that I did spend a lot of time with, or quite a bit of time with, is Sia Lee, who is
Mm-hmm.
a member of the Nevada volleyball team. It was the team captain, and they boycotted against San Jose State, and the university did not support them in
Mm-hmm.
boycotting. So this woman showed, I think, extraordinary character, very principled. She took the high road. I think she took the hard path, not the easy one, to do the right thing. And I just think she's a young woman of such impressive character. And at the end of the day, that's what sports is for. Most people are never going to the Olympics, let alone, most people are not getting a D1 scholarship. These young women all did. But at the end of the day, we put our children in sports to build character, to learn hard work, discipline, leadership, how to be a teammate, all of these things. And I just wanted to honor these women who I think exhibit so much strength of character and are never going to get an NIL platform from any other brand. They won't touch them with a 10-foot pole. And so I just feel like they embody what sports is all about and what youth sports is all about. And they're also strong and disciplined and I think principled. And so I think they were just sort of stunned because they know what they're doing and what they're saying is still not embraced in the mainstream culture. So to know that there is a brand out there, there are leaders out there that will stand with them and ensure that they're protected and feel much less alone, I think is really meaningful for them.
Yeah, and I spoke to Sia a few months ago. She was very cool, and I personally attributed this Nevada team to being like they had a bunch of Hawaiian girl, Polynesian, Samoan girls, and you're not going to push those people around. Both
That's true.
physically and mentally, you're not going to push like six Samoan girls around who have their scholarships on the line. You're not going to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
That's basically what I gathered from that situation, and I was like, it makes sense. It makes sense that these girls are just refusing to do it. So, do you have any plans for this NIL deal with these girls? Are we going to see any content coming up from them?
Yeah. It's different by athlete, kind of depending on the athlete. Sia will be in an ad that we have coming out in early 2025. But I think we're going to, work on the right partnership with each athlete. So in some instances, it'll be appearing in advertising, in photo shoots, at events, speaking at events that we sponsor. It will vary by athlete, just like it does with every other brand. But yeah, Sia will be first up to appear in an ad that we'll push out in February.
Very cool. Have you thought
Yeah.
about doing anything where these girls are going to speak with young girls, maybe like a 12-year-old baseball team or anything? Just, sort of
Yeah.
let them know, hey, this is normal what you're doing
Yeah.
right now. Don't let other people tell you that it's not.
I love that. I mean, what you just said is the whole brand, because if somebody, a mom like me, my two youngest children both play a lot of soccer, it's suddenly normal to say it. Like other parents have come up to me and they said, oh, I agree with you. I can say that. It's like it makes it okay to say it out loud. It's permission. And I think these girls do that for a lot of young girls. And so, yeah, we'd love to do events like that. I mean, I will tell you, I've done quite a few events with Riley Gaines at this point, and she stays and talks to every single young girl that wants to talk to her. And I think it's just, it's permission to keep doing it and stand up and be strong and adhere to your principles. And I had a very similar experience, speaking out about abuse in gymnastics, like thousands and thousands of letters from girls and young women who said, like, I didn't realize I could push back on this treatment from my coach. Like, thank you for, one, confirming this is in fact abuse, and two, making it clear that I can say this and that there's a better way, there's a better path forward. So that's a great idea, and I think we would love to do that in 2025, and we do have some cool events planned.
Well, one of the reasons I think that it's so important to talk about this stuff from my perspective is we all know perspective is the biggest thing. My truth is the biggest thing I can possibly
You know,
spread.
that's my least favorite phrase on the planet. I hate it,
My
and I hate
truth,
it.
my lived experience, indigenous ways of knowing. But the reason that I think it's so important is because, from my perspective, what I've been hammered with over the last, I guess, 7 to 10 years is the fake feminism, right? The people that work at Vice and now this, where it's like, I just care so much about women and all this fake stuff. And then finally, there's a thing that's an actual problem, right? Where I can sit there and say, okay, this is actually real. There's guys beating up women in
Right.
boxing, for example. So I think that we can't merge the two. I can't mentally, and we shouldn't merge the two where it's, some overweight guy at a magazine is saying that he's an ally, and we can't merge that with men punching women in the face. We can't convolute the two. So at some point we have to say, hey, this isn't the fake stuff. This actually has to be a thing that isn't allowed to happen. So that's why I think that's important. The last thing
Don't
I
you?
think. Go ahead.
Can I just ask you a question? Because one thing that has my head spinning. I mean, not really, because I'm now kind of. I get it. This is where we are. But like, we went from 2017, 18, height of Me Too, a guy. You're a guy. I'm not. You know, in that environment, you could like look at somebody crooked and be accused of sexual assault, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was the environment we were living in. And I think there was some look, the Nasser victims emerged during that time. Like there was some truth to some people, but it jumped the shark at a certain point, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
looked at me crooked at the water cooler was a jump the shark moment. The 500 athletes who were sexually assaulted by Larry Nasser, that needed to come out. That needed to come out. But we've gone from he looked at me funny, that's sexual assault, to he can beat the shit out of you in the boxing ring and that's just fine and you need to deal with it. Or
Mm-hmm.
he can come into the locker room and ogle you and have his parts and make you feel very uncomfortable and you're a bigot if you mention it. Like how did we get there? It's like so close together. How do
There's
you think we got?
the one swimmer, Rika or Reka Georgi, who is
Yeah.
like in the locker room with Leah Thomas, who pressed his
Yeah.
dong up against her, and he's like, "Oh, sorry."
Do we say that? I know, Reka. Yes.
Yeah. And how did we get here? If you want my honest
Yeah,
opinion,
I
what I would
do.
say with my friends, Jennifer, and at this point, I trust you because you've been cursing and making fun of me.
Okay.
Um, I think that a lot of this comes from these are desperate ways that men can try to get women. I'll use examples from some of these magazines where they've had, or these online publications where men desperately want to defend women, call themselves male feminists, and then they get fired for sexual harassment. These are the last ways that men think
I
of
think
to
Curry
try to get
favorite. Right.
to get women to think that they're dateable. So a guy will say, "Oh, I believe in all of this. I believe this is great. Yeah, a man can be a woman. Yeah, you're totally right. We can't be mean to this guy. He thinks he's a woman, therefore he is a woman. Please go out with me. Please let me near you." This is the sad reality of the lonely male. It's where what
Fair.
stems incels, what
Yeah.
stems perverts. It's what stems all these things. A desperate man, and then therefore there are men in positions who are desperate. Coach Kress, the coach of the San Jose
The San
State,
Jose
there where he
State.
just doesn't say anything. He's like, "Oh, it's such a shame that these girls are getting hate messages and all these things." Well, why is that happening? Why are people calling and emailing your website, your school there? He just wouldn't address what the actual problem is. So it's weak men put in these positions or already in these positions that won't say anything. They don't want to appear mean because they're afraid of how
Yeah.
women will think of them. That's what I've
Well,
discussed with many men.
yeah, I think that's fair. I think I just sort of more wondering how do we go in a 2 year time span from all men are evil and every glance is akin to rape to well these men with dresses are great and you should let them parade around the locker room naked or else you're a really bad person. Like why is the culture's willing to get on board with that? But I think you touch on something really important is it's the cause of the day, it's the cause du jour, and everybody goes along because they're afraid of the activist backlash. I mean,
Being
it's
called
sort of that
mean.
of being called mean or a murderer or a racist or a bigot or any of those things. Same thing during COVID. It's like But then they're so mean. I mean, look at all these lefties who
Yeah.
are cheering for the murder of a CEO. I'm not going to comment. I don't know anything about his career. I do know that he started out very humble beginnings and, worked his way up. He was like the son of a farmer or something. Like they're cheering murder. The people, the anti-gun people are cheering murder, and they're the nice people. I mean, what is
Every single belief that's like the standard far left communist belief, if you want to call it that, none of them actually can coexist at the same time.
no, there's no, you're
I
right.
love LGBT and transgenderism, but I also love Palestine and Islam. Like these things don't actually cross over. None of them can coexist, but you
That's
have
true.
to agree with each pillar in order to be accepted
No,
into, like, at this point I think it's just a death cult. Like death is cool, is the cool and ultimate goal here.
well, you raised a really good point. Like the whole thing will collapse under the weight of its own lack of logic. Because even the gender ideology, just that, like take all the other things out, like the gays for the gays for Gaza or whatever, which is my own favorite as a Jew, but I'll set that aside. Um, Even the gender ideology piece doesn't make any sense because they're gender is fluid, it's fine, it's non-binary, and yet you have to a child, it is binary because you have to cut off your parts to become the other one. That
That's
is, you're
correct.
acknowledging the binary, and yet then it's also non-binary. Like none of it makes any sense. And trans women are women, but women are non-trans women. Like the whole thing will collapse under the weight of its own lack of logic at some point, I think. It's just going to take a while. I think it's
It
going to take
just
a while.
takes, enough people. They never want to face, and I've talked about the video game industry in this sense, where they use these consulting companies to put forced diversity into a video game, and then when people point out that this consulting company was used, where they're just like, you're attacking me. As soon as their own views are presented to them, which they say are
Right,
amazing, they say it's
right.
actually an attack on them, which is really strange.
Yeah, I agree. I hear you, and I see that
I
too.
hear you. I respect your truth and your lived experience as well.
I want to say though, saying my perspective is not the same as saying my truth. My perspective is
I
fine.
agree.
I respect that because that's saying this is my opinion. Saying my truth suggests that truth is subjective, which it is not. And I first encountered this phrase during Me Too. I actually think the reason it started being used. So a lot of the Larry Nassar victims were using it in their sort of public statements about what happened. Well, my truth is this was abuse. And I would tell some of them, many who are my friends, don't use that. It's actually the truth that
Yeah.
he assaulted you. But it's like from their perspective, I think it's a very feminine term in a sense, and it softens it. It's like it's not they weren't willing to say this guy is a predator and a pedophile and a rapist. That is the truth, not my truth. It's like they were tiptoeing up to it, if you see what I'm saying, and trying to sort of take the edge off of it. And if you say it's my truth, who can argue? Because
Exactly.
you're
You
really
can't
saying it's my
disagree with
opinion.
me. Exactly.
Right. And so I just started to find that phrase used a lot in like 17 and 18. And everyone I knew that used it, I was like, please don't say that. Like, stop it. If it's your perspective, fine. But we're talking about a crime that has been committed here. And there are facts that support that this crime has been committed. That is not a perspective on truth. That is objective reality, just like biological sex is objective reality.
You can't say that. 2018 seems like 100 years ago at this point. T-shirt idea. My truth is just no, wait. Your truth is not real. My truth is reality. And then XXXY. I'll fire off an
Tell them,
email with a
tell
bunch of
me.
my drawings. It'll be mostly stick figures, but you'll get
That's
I'll
cool. I
fax
like
it
it.
to you.
Okay. I don't have one. Do people have faxes? I know you're making a joke. I don't think
I'll have a fax machine. If I can actually fax someone, I would do it just for, I
you could
love
do it
old
from
technology.
Kinko's. You have to go to Kinko's to
Excuse
fax.
me, we don't
Although I guess
have Kinkos in Canada, so I don't know. I'm vaguely aware of what that is.
a Kinko's is a place with a lot of copy machines
Hmm.
and sort of like officey stuff. So if you need to make a lot of copies or send a fax or do some mailing of packages, and you are like a small business, or an individual, and you don't have access to all those things, you would go to a Kinko's.
Interesting.
So
I
that
like the
helps.
vibe, the sound of that, the vibe of that would be very good. Just all copy machines and then dial-up internet sounds going on in the
Yeah,
background.
totally. That's what it is. I did not. I should have guessed Canada because of the accent. I didn't
What
pick up
accent?
the first.
Excuse me? What word? Is it about?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the only one anybody ever gets. I'm basically, you can imagine I'm from Michigan or Wisconsin. That's pretty close. Same
Different
accent.
though. Is it?
Unbelievable. Wisconsin? Chicago?
My husband's Chicago. He has that flat A Chicago thing.
Yeah, I've been to Chicago once, and there is even if they don't have an accent, if they say the White Sox, they have to say it with like an A. It's
That's right.
legally binding, I think. The Sox game.
Yeah, I think so. In Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, I don't have the accent, but it's a really terrible accent. And even if they don't have the whole thing, most people say wooder. Do you even know what word
Wooder?
I just said?
Wooder? No.
Yeah, water.
Oh my god, I hate it so much. Mark Wahlberg's from Philadelphia, isn't he? The
Boston. Boston.
Boston? Are you
Yeah,
sure? Maybe he just played the
Boston.
guy from Philadelphia. But like
No, he is Boston.
an Irish
Boston.
or an Italian from Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, it's all molding together.
It is, but the
Mac.
accents are slightly different. The accents are slightly different. I hate the Philly one the most because that's where I'm from, and I think it just grates on me. It has a weird Pennsylvania Dutch thing. It's different. The Philly accent is different, but they all say wooder. Or they also say use, which I think they do in Boston. Like what he's doing, what he's going to
Uh,
do later.
if you go to a white trash enough place around here, they'd say use
Oh,
guys for
really?
sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I thought that was like a East Coast United States. Yeah, use. What are you doing later?
He
What are you
use
going to do?
guys. Yeah, exactly.
Do you want to grab some beers?
How important is Boy Meets World to your culture? Last question.
I don't know.
You
I
never
don't know.
watched it?
I'm too old.
You say that, but I don't believe you.
I'm
Okay,
55.
Jennifer.
I'm too old for that show. That's not my era.
It doesn't matter. Eras don't matter anymore. Your truth is what matters. I'm just never gonna
That's
let that
true.
go. Whenever we cross paths, it's gonna be my truth related. I'll show up wearing it that says that.
I think that's a good.
Okay,
That's good.
my truth. Indigenous ways of knowing is a real thing, by the way. You should look that up.
I've heard of that. Can I ask you? I'm gonna ask you one more question. The
Yeah,
whole my true thing, like I said, I think it's feminine. I think it's part of the like feminization of the culture, which I think I frown upon at this point. I think it takes the
yeah.
edges off. It's like nothing has. It's soft versus hard. Like there's hard facts where it's my truth. Do any men use this phrase? Have you ever heard a
No,
man say my truth?
no,
Right.
no.
I
I've
rest my case.
unless they are trying to use some sort of like
Get laid.
that too, but I mean like the only time I've heard like sort of that sort of stuff is like in a racial superiority argument where
Oh,
it's just like a black man's
right.
truth or something like
That's a
that.
good point. Yes, you're right. I have heard it in that context. Our
Yes.
truth is this. This is our, yeah, our lived
Yes.
experience. Okay, interesting. But you see the point that it is sort of like a feminine.
Yes. I mean my lady's at the point where she's just like I don't know what I'm okay with women running at this point in terms of politics.
She's that far down the path.
That's what the world has done to her.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
make them stay home, barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah, real 1800s home I'm living in here.
Somebody's gonna cut this and edit it to me being this like
Yes,
whatever
yes, they will.
person that thinks women should stay home and be barefoot and pregnant, despite the fact that I'm the breadwinner in my family. Whatever. It doesn't matter. They'll do it anyway. That's fine. I'm also a
Yes.
racist.
You're
So
sexist. Clearly, that's the sexist point you just brought up. So
I'm also racist, sexist, eugenicist, and ageist because I wanted the
that's
old people to die during COVID.
that's a clip right there. Just I'm racist. I'm sexist.
I'm also an anti-Semite, even though I'm Jewish. I often get called a Christo-fascist, which I had to look up.
A Christo fascist. I can decipher what that means, but I've never heard it before.
Yeah, I hadn't heard it either. It's a new one. I
Did you
looked
say
it up.
crypto or Christo, as in like
Christo,
crystal knock?
as in Christian.
Oh, see, I was
Like
okay,
like a white Christian nationalist.
okay, interesting.
That's me. They should add
It's
that
always
to the cut.
interesting. Nazism is socialism, which is the interesting thing that never gets brought up in the left wing sphere. Is that actually the Nazis believed closer to what they believe in how to run a country, which is socialism. But facts.
But without all the Jews.
Correct, yes. But the liberals think that right-wing things is what leads to fascism, when I would disagree with that.
It's a bit of horseshoe, probably, right? That it can come from
Yes.
both sides. I mean, the anti-Semitism that's so glaring right now, I'm sure you're seeing it in Canada too, is on the far right and the far left.
Well, that's always been there, but when it bleeds, when it comes from the left wing, they're like forced to agree with it, right? Like even that, like I was saying before, now you have to also agree with transgenderism while at the same time agreeing with the people that are against it. So, and that's okay in the mainstream too. Like AOC can go out there and be like, Palestine's the greatest thing in the world, but she also can go out there and say transgenderism is sweet, and there's no questions asked on her side. When at her Christmas with the
intersectionality has its limits.
It does,
right? It does. Yeah. I mean, I could go on about the support of that cause, but I won't because we're probably out of time.
We can do this again on whatever fascist topics you'd like, if you'd like. We'll just have the XXXY logo in the corner at all times.
Which some people who hate us, which there's a lot, say looks like swastikas, and that's how they know I'm a Christo-fascist.
Let me see. Just the letters or the logo itself?
The logo.
Let me see if I can pull that up somewhere.
Here. I mean, it's on my
right
shirt,
there.
But I don't know if you can see it because it's sort of reflective. It's 3 X's. It's XXXY. I mean, they look nothing like swastikas.
This is correct. But, they can try. And they will.
And they will. They will never stop. This is not over. We just need to drown them out with common sense.
Well, I can't wait to see the ads and all the other stuff you guys do. Thanks for coming on and staying so long. We can definitely do this again if you're up for it and talk about more crypto-fascism or Christo-fascism as well. Anything else you want to say?
No, I'm really grateful. The piece you wrote yesterday was great, and thanks for the support. And I would love to talk about crypto-fascism, but I don't know anything about that.
Bitcoin related, I think. I don't know. All right. Thanks a lot, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Turn it up, Jordan.